Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening for those who are joining from the online portal. And welcome to the session called Supporting the Shift to Climate Resilience WASH Service. My name is Virginia Maria Escurrena. I work as Program Manager for Seaweed in Stockholm International Water Institute. And we welcome you today for this session that will tap into a very important issue. Why is not the WASH sector taking advantage of or having such a little amount of big climate financing worldwide? We know that, well, this session is being organized together with the UNICEF headquarters, the Stockholm International Water Institute, and the United Kingdom Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. We know that from the $600 billion US dollars available worldwide for climate finance, the water sector gets only 3%, and from this 3% is only 10% for rural or basic WASH services. So what is going on in this sector? How can we tap into these opportunities in a better manner? We have several cases studied. This session has three main chapters, three main parts. The first one, we will listen to Fiona Ward from UNICEF headquarters, WASH specialist, who's going to show to us how UNICEF is how it's applying some step-by-step methodology to help the WASH sector become more resilient, and then creating capacities, creating passerelles of connection between the WASH sector and the climate sector, climate actors in different countries. And we will have the opportunity to listen how they are connecting in different countries. Then we have 4 case studies in the second chapter, where we will listen to the actors on the ground in 4 countries, in Sudan, Chad, Nepal, and Uganda, who would help us understand how they manage to create those passerelles and little by little become delivering more resilient WASH services. And the third chapter of the session is a panel discussion. We hope to have some time for you to ask questions too, and ideally have a better understanding of these opportunities that we would like all to gather. But before that, and to get into the matter, we would like to, well, this is again my presentation, but we would like to, for you to answer some questions in Menti. So gather your phones, and if you don't mind, we will have 3 questions for you to have the temperature of what you think are barriers and opportunities to connect those 2 sectors. So we have 3 questions. If you go to menti.com, and that's the code is 1760015, and we have the first question, which is, for those working in the WASH sector, what are the barriers with one word? Let's choose one barrier that you feel is the most important to shifting your program to be climate resilient. What would you say is the barrier that prevents your program to become more climate resilient? Great. Let's give some seconds. Great. Funding, money, resources. It seems to be like together with knowledge, capacity, politics, scientific knowledge, coordination. Great. We'll see hopefully some examples of how to leverage those barriers or how to overcome those barriers on this session. Let's go to the second question, please. Henning. On a scale 1 to 5, how would you score the WASH sector for its efforts to integrate climate resilience into its programming? How strong are our efforts to become climate resilient as the WASH sector? From 1 to 5. So 2.5, the average, means that we are making an effort. That's good to know. We want, and we now have to know how to do it. Great. Let's go to the third question, please. And last one. On a scale of 1 to 5, how easy do you think it is to mobilize the work sector to participate in key climate discussions? Great. We think it's quite difficult. Well, there is the discrepancy here. You see the average is in the middle because there is no consensus. Some of you think it's very difficult. Some of you think it's very easy. So who knows? Who knows? But anyway, that's a picture of what you think in this room. So I think it's very interesting to see where we stand. Great. Having said so, I'll give the floor to Fiona. Let me introduce Fiona properly. Fiona is a water sanitation and hygiene specialist based in UNICEF headquarters in New York. Fiona is hydrogeologist and works in the water and environment team, where she has been for almost 4 years. Her key areas of focus are climate resilient wash programming, solar-powered water systems, environmental and social safeguards, and climate finance. So Fiona, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. Great to see such a turnout. And I was just asking some of our panelists if they had put in some of those key words, because they definitely feature a lot in some of the challenges that we face. And interesting to see how there are divergent opinions, and that's exactly why we're here today, just to really understand where the gaps are, what is realistic, and how do we do this. So just to say that in UNICEF, we realized that we need to do a lot more about integrating climate resilience into our programming. I think when we measured it, we were reaching about 16 million people with a climate resilient service, but we can do a lot more. There was also certainly an understanding that, or perception, certainly that climate finance was very easy. We could just put together our WASH proposals, sprinkle in a couple of words on climate, and climate financing would come rushing towards us, and that's certainly not the case. And so really what we want to do with this shift is really just to address, well, how do you integrate climate risks into our programming? How is it different than our normal WASH programming? Why is it important? And why is this, and what are the opportunities? And I think there are enormous opportunities which the WASH sector has not yet taken in. So I would hope by the end of the session that some of those bars may have changed. When I was putting together this session, I wanted to include this picture. I didn't include a climate resilient water service or a sanitation service, but I really wanted to put in just about how climate is related to livelihoods and people's lives and the resilience of communities. It's really not just about having a resilient service, it's about the impact on a whole community, and that really affects everyone. Okay, so when I was looking at preparing for this session, I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure whether some of you know, but this is from a publication which UNICEF released in 2017. And it really struck me when I was looking at it, because there are some things which we are now seeing as evidence of climate impact on children that are not even included here. So it was a real wake-up call. This is only from 2017. So for example, when I was looking at this, I saw that migration wasn't included, conflict isn't included, and these are now really increasingly focusing on WASH. About 2 years ago, we had a regional WASH network meeting in Nepal, and we were doing a capacity building on climate and using the strategic framework. And I actually gave out a prize for our staff who could add on more of this, but even still, it's changed even then in 2 years. So it was a real, reality check for me when I saw this. So as Virginia mentioned, we really decided, okay, how are we going to try to shift our programs? So really, our staff just wanted to know, okay, tell us what to do, how to do it. And then you realize, actually, it's very difficult. A lot of the WASH sector is working at different levels. The contexts, the climate risks in different countries are completely different. So really, we just tried to make this as easy as possible. Initially, this was going to be an internal document for UNICEF. It was really just to help our staff get an understanding of what steps are involved. But now it has evolved, and we're sharing this widely, and I'll put this on into the files in the session on the page for the site. But just to go through that, really, we didn't need a huge amount of money to start this, but it was a real mind-blowing change for our teams who started this whole process, and I'll go through that in a little bit. But really, it's just the first thing. Lots of these steps can be done with no funds whatsoever. They can be done with an understanding of where you search and what the implications of that are. So step one is a stakeholder analysis. And this is really just who is working on climate in our WASH sector. We often just speak to ministries of water and irrigation, but we don't speak to agriculture. Sometimes we don't speak to health. But it's a bit really to understand, for example, who is the national designated authority in the country, because that is, for example, the focal point for some of the main climate funds. So it's understanding, and also with step two, how is climate reflected? How is climate change and extreme events reflected in some of our key national WASH policies, subnational or national policies? But then also, how is WASH, how are our climate risks to WASH reflected in key climate policies? And then you realize that actually that's a key criteria for some of the major climate funds, that if WASH is not included as a national climate priority, you won't be able to get climate financing. So it was a real wake-up call that with a really, really basic search, you could really highlight. Often the key policies include water, but not sanitation or not water for domestic use. So this is a real triggering point. Step three, then really look, this is where we worked closely with SIWI and for the other steps in terms of how do you undertake the climate risk analysis? How do you understand what the climate risks are? How do they change throughout the country? And how do these affect infrastructure, but also the delivery of the services? So it's not just about having a service, it's about having the infrastructure, it's about also the service. So steps 4 and 5 are about how you identify solutions to these and how you prioritize. And importantly, step 6, we included this because UNICEF is finalizing its environmental and social safeguards, but for many main donors now and for major climate funds, demonstrating that you have environmental and social safeguards is a prerequisite. So if it's really just to help the sector, how do you undertake this? Most of our programming already covers intrinsically the environmental risks, but maybe not the social risks, and maybe not looking into the future, which is a requirement. And then step 7 is an internal UNICEF work plan, but it could be applied anywhere. Step 8 was really interesting in terms of, well, how much funding is coming into the country and how much financing is coming in, from which climate funds, from which bilateral donors, who is accredited and working in the country, what are the opportunities with the development banks or other UN agencies? And it was really just to highlight, I'm not sure whether many of you are familiar with readiness funding, but it was really just to understand who is active and what money has been obtained for the country on finance, on climate finance, and where WASH is in that. And often it's not there. There's often a lot of climate finance for large-scale water infrastructure, but not for climate finance. And then the last part is, how do you measure climate resilience? And we really struggled with this in terms of how do you define a climate resilient service? And Alistair helped us, who you'll hear from a little bit, about basically doing some research on how do you define it. So in the end, we came up with our own definition because we really needed our teams to understand how can you hand on heart really say that this is your best efforts for climate resilience sanitation. So UNICEF does monitoring every year, and in terms of really back and forth with country offices to really quality control the numbers so that we were really sure that the numbers meant that they were climate resilient. I think last year we had 6 million for climate resilient water service and 3 million for climate resilient sanitation service. So just the 3 objectives, just to focus again. It's not just about the infrastructure. So the first part of the objective is the infrastructure and the services, but it's also objective 2 relates to the community resilience and how these are all connected. And the third objective is basically looking at what you can do to be low carbon. So just 3 more slides to go for me. So as I mentioned, to move all of our programs, and UNICEF has WASH programs in over 100 countries, there was a sense that we needed a huge amount of money to move all of our programs. But actually, we got some internal funding from our UNICEF headquarters and from the British government. And importantly, that allowed us to start. And actually, when we saw it, even just the first 5 steps before any infrastructure has been constructed for the benefit of the whole sector is that for a really kind of small, moderate amount of money with research undertaken on those various steps, it was a real wake-up call. Who is active in the sector? What key discussions are going on that WASH is not aware of and is not around the table and is not influencing? What are the opportunities? Who is developing proposals for what? What research has been done on climate risks? What solutions are there? How effective they are? So it was a huge mind-opening experience with a really moderate amount of effort that people realized we're behind. The WASH sector is not being represented. We need to find out when these discussions are taking place. Who do we need to influence? What do we need to bring to the table for the benefit of the whole WASH sector and not just for UNICEF programming? So this is really, it ignited our teams and the sector, I would say. There has been a reactivation of a number of climate task forces or coordination mechanisms which used to exist but have not kind of been recently active. Technical gaps were identified. So this is really where the WASH sector flagged what are the impacts of climate change and extreme events on WASH services and how are these affecting the communities? And then from that, you'll hear in some of the videos, what were the impacts in impacts in terms of getting these into some of the key climate documents, which was the trigger then to get into the national adaptation plans, the nationally determined contributions, and then listed as a key national priority. I'm sure you're aware of what the climate rationale is and the additionality, but that was a big difference. I mean, it was really trying to get people to move from a standard WASH project with a few references to climate to really having a strong link between the climate risks, the technical solutions, and how these were going to be implemented. So it was really based upon the science and the data available. In many cases, the data isn't available, but it's really just what you can do with what you have. And certainly it also triggered a lot of activity in our headquarters. What partnerships do we need? This is different than what we have done before. So this is how we expanded our partnership with CIWI. We also got some experts on climate finance involved. We got some companies to help us on environmental and social safeguards. And it's also partnerships. How do we expand our partnerships with accredited entities, but also with regional development banks, and importantly, agencies at a national level which have accreditation and working with them and building their capacity, and also working with the World Meteorological Organization on the application of technical science and into the design of WASH infrastructure. And importantly, on a positive note, our teams are now working with ministries that they hadn't worked with before, that they were aware they were there, but there was no interaction. And again, the emphasis between WASH and water resource management. And again, as I mentioned, the challenge with measuring climate resilient WASH services. So just going forward, we're really looking, I think there's been a lot of learning with this. We've really looked at how we can expand this to more countries. UNICEF became a delivery partner for GCF readiness in 2020. And for me, even if it's a relatively small amount of money, it's really integral for the benefit of the whole sector. And so it's not just if UNICEF gets the funding, it's really whatever the ministry, if a ministry is accredited or another partner, but it's really identifying the gaps through the various steps to understand what data is missing, what readiness funds can be available to address this, and then also developing technical briefs. I think we're probably all in agreement. Climate resilient sanitation is behind climate resilient water, and how can we address that? And certainly our sanitation team are working on a technical brief on what climate resilient sanitation means. We're also working with CIWI on water demand management. With the FCDO funding, we're also working on the revision of the strategic framework. And importantly, I'm sure you're all asking, like, how do you measure this on a larger scale? So we're also working with the JMP on how to integrate measures of water scarcity and climate resilience into household surveys, so at least then form an update for the JMP. And again, the climate finance technical capacity building, Alistair here has been involved in doing really one-to-one sessions with our key government counterparts on an overview of climate finance, some background information onto the potential for climate finance for the country, some ideas, but also, and importantly, an understanding as to what is a process for putting together a proposal. There's a large amount of resources and time required. There is a very, very clear science required. So but on a positive way to balance that, there's huge, enormous resources for this sector. So really trying to look at that and the potential for that. And again, the development of the key messages. But just to say, really from our understanding, and I saw lots of those coming in terms of the barriers in the first Menti that we did. We've gone through some of these, but just to highlight, we also need to create the demand for climate resilient WASH services. It's not just sufficient for all of our agencies working in the sector to say, okay, we all need to work on climate resilience, but we also need to create that demand. So I'd be interested also to hear what different agencies are doing about that. We've had this really interesting discussion in terms of safely managed and climate resilience, safely managed services. So while it's important to progress along the service ladder, climate resilient services are not automatically safely managed and vice versa. There are huge opportunities for WASH for both adaptation and mitigation. There's huge potential also to complement water scarcity programs, water reuse, energy, water efficiency, especially now with the situation in Ukraine and the revised understanding of the sensitivity of WASH services to fuel, but also the potential to really work together with water resource management sector in terms of food and water security. I think there's huge, enormous potential for us. And just to say that there is, the issue is not a lack of demand for climate resilient WASH projects. The issue is a lack of supply of credibly put together scientifically based projects. And again, my last point is the private sector is necessary. So this is where we're building up the demand for climate resilient services, and these services are available. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona, for having shared with us this pathway where UNICEF with partners went through the regular WASH projects to the resilient and the challenges that still are remaining, like how to measure what is a climate resilient WASH service. Let's go now step by step with these 4 examples. As I said, this is the second chapter of the session. We would like, these 4 countries are 4 out of 11 of where UNICEF is active preparing this shift. But we would like to highlight specific parts of this pathway in each of these countries. So we will see first, for example, a video of Sudan, where what we would like to highlight here, you will see is that the first steps that Fiona was mentioning, the landscape analysis, creating the task force, understanding the policies in the country, are done at subnational level, and the risk assessment in a multi-stakeholder platform are done at a subnational level. And by creating that capacity at subnational level, you can this process can be replicated in other subnations of this in a specific case of Sudan. So you create capacity local, and then as doing the risk assessment, they will contextualize the results in each of the regions of the country. So having said so, let's see the video.
The climate change signals and impacts becoming more frequent and sharp. This year, about 20 localities out of 21 affected by dry spell, almost like 600,000 people already affected. Normal drop down of water table and water depletion clearly indicated in several of production waters. The low yield of water sources resulted on more breakdown due to increasing of working hours. In fact, high demand to water supply leads to negative socio-economic impacts due to increase on water cost supply through private sector especially in the urban settlements. In rural areas, livestock moves from dry areas to south part of the state. This movement creates high stress on existing water facilities where tension and competition expected between the residents, farmers, and the nomads, in addition to ethnic sensitives and land ownership issues. Currently, efforts were paid to address the challenges in a systematic and well-structured approach through collective and integrated manner between the government of Sudan and UNICEF, with technical support of CIVI, aiming to contribute on strengthening the climate change challenges for wash sector in the whole region.
Through extensive multi-stakeholder consultations, a climate rationale was formulated for the subnational, i.e. state level, allowing the response frameworks to include subnational and contextual specificities. The observed and projected impacts of climate change on wash services are articulated through solid analysis, and technical solutions are identified to mitigate and adapt to the climate risks. In January 2022, an online climate change risk assessment for WASH workshop was conducted for the 5 states. The assessment showed that risks related to drought, flooding, and heat wave hazards were most prioritized. The analysis also specified those most vulnerable, exposed to multiple climate risks. On 17th and 18th of May 2022, a face-to-face workshop was held in Al Fashir, North Darfur, in the presence of Darfur state-level National Adaptation Plan committee members. The workshop identified adaptation options at the local and community level, watershed level, and at the regional state administrative level, which is the enabling environment level. The proposed solutions were set to deal with several challenges, such as inadequate institutional arrangements, limited financial resources, lack of technical capacities, information sharing, weak monitoring and coordination mechanisms between relative stakeholders, and unapproved, updated guidelines, strategies, and policies. Throughout this process, capacities of government officials and UNICEF staff have been built, allowing the analysis to be replicated at the subnational level in other states in the near future.
All sectors, stakeholders has to be together to have proper and efficient coordination. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we thank also Mr. Mustafa Fall, Deputy General of State Water, Environment and Sanitation Corporation of South Darfur State. And now we go to the second case study. This is about Uganda. And for this country, we have a presentation. It's a 4-minute presentation where they go more in detail on each of the steps that they went through. This is done, of course, by Mr. Kalis Tindimuyaga, Commissioner for Water Resource Planning and Regulation of the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. Hope you enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. I'm called Dr. Kalis Tindimugaya, working with the Ministry of Water and Environment, and I will be presenting a case study of Uganda on supporting the shift to climate resilient wash services. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this session. The work I'm going to present on has been done collaboratively by UNICEF, CIWI, and the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. We did this work by developing the climate rationale and narrative. We started by undertaking an assessment of climate risk and vulnerability, and we did this through a number of stages. We set up a wash and climate task force composed of key organizations with a stake in the climate wash resilience. We did a hazard characterization, looking at what are the shocks and stresses and the likelihood probability that they will occur. We did an analysis of exposure, where we looked at which populations and systems are exposed to shocks and stresses and where. We did an analysis of vulnerability, who are particularly vulnerable to shocks and stresses and what their characteristics are. And finally, we calculated and analyzed the risks, how risks can ultimately be computed and prioritized. And this work enabled us to develop a results framework and rationale for climate resilient waste services, where we also identified the various options at the national level, at the watershed level, and the local level, looking at supply, management, and institutions, demand, and behavior change. We also looked at the climate policy in Uganda. The updated NDC, National Determined Contribution, is undergoing final stages of clearance, and as such, the technical review and approval by the Technical Committee on Climate Change is paramount. Uganda, through the Ministry of Water and Environment, intends to make a submission to the UNFCCC Secretariat by the end of this year, and the ongoing collaboration between UNICEF, SIWI, and Ministry of Water and Environment has actually contributed to inclusion of WASH in NDC for Uganda. With respect to the National Adaptation Plan, there is already a sectoral NAP for agriculture, and the government is finalizing cooperation agreement with a number of partners to start the implementation of this NAP by the end of the financial year 2022-2023. The updated NDC for Uganda basically is focusing on adaptation and mitigation, and we have 13 sectors under adaptation and 6 sectors under mitigation. As you can see, water and sanitation is one of the key sectors under adaptation, while waste, including wastewater and sanitation, are one of the priority sectors under mitigation. For Uganda, adaptation remains the priority response to climate change. The updated NDC is gender responsive and features both adaptation and mitigation contribution. A number of actions have been recommended out of this work. The first one is the development of the National Adaptation Plan for WASH sector, as has been done for the agricultural sector, and we see it as a golden opportunity for us. We also need to review the climate and WASH policies. We need to update the Uganda National Climate Change Policy to reflect new NDC priorities and related climate change strategy and response plans for the water sector. We also need to update the national water policy to integrate climate lens. We need to develop proposals to take advantage of climate financing, and we are planning to submit a concept note to the Green Climate Fund. We want to develop a 5-year action plan for ocean climate change and translate it into annual action plans. And finally, we want to maintain a WASH and climate task force so that can continue this work and integrate this work with the WASH subsector and environment subsector. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you. I would like to highlight here that the work in Uganda also finalized or is now with the NDC that has successfully included water aspects, not only mitigation and adaptation, but also mitigation in a gender-sensitive NDC. So the task force is still running, so it's still some work to do. But as Fiona pointed out in her presentation, one of the first wake-up calls that we had was that if it's not a priority, water is not a priority in the climate policy, no funding will come. So this is one example, and the ones that we are going to see now also of this is example of Chad. where also they successfully managed to integrate the water aspects in the NDC. So we'll see this now in the presentation of UNICEF WASH specialist, Mrs. Albertine Uyimana, and the chat's communication focal point for the Ministry of Environment, Fisheries and Sustainable Development, Mr. Mahamat Hassane Idris.
Chad is ranked as #2 worldwide in terms of the impact of climate change on children and their families. Less than half of the population have access to water, while only 1 household in 10 have access to a basic sanitation service. Climate change contributes to the low access of wash services. Flooding can damage and destroy water sources and household latrines, pushing families to resort to open defecation and potentially contaminating water sources. It was important to include the risks posed by climate change on the wash sector in the national discussions on climate change. Alliances were built with other financial and technical partners, including the African Development Bank, UNDP, SIWI, and Sanitation and Water for All. Technical briefs on the linkages between WASH and climate change were developed. As a result, WASH is now classified as part among 8 priority sectors for the NAP and NDCs. In partnership with SIWI and FCDO, technical support to government is ongoing to develop a sector-specific national adaptation plan and the climate-rationale, which will contribute to the efforts of mobilizing climate financing. Thanks to the great partnership and commitment of the government of Chad, UNICEF and SIWI, with support from FCDO.
Le Tchad a signé et ratifié la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur le changement climatique. Donc, vis-à-vis de cette ratification, le Tchad a ses engagements et ses obligations, ses engagements vis-à-vis de la Convention. Nous apprécions particulièrement l'appui de l'UNICEF, de SUI et de l'Alliance SWA pour nous avoir permis de faire plus d'analyses sur les risques climatiques pour le secteur affecté WASH. Le ministère de l'Environnement ne travaille pas étroitement avec l'UNICEF, qui était beaucoup plus considéré comme un partenaire clé du ministère en charge de l'eau et de l'assainissement pour améliorer l'accès à ces services cruciaux pour le développement humain. Cependant, le ministère de l'Environnement avait bénéficié beaucoup d'appui de faibles fonds pour l'environnement mondial pour élaborer ces 3 documents clés dans le cadre du changement climatique. Bien que le document comme le PNA, la CDN, la 3e communication nationale a été validé par le gouvernement et les partenaires techniques, mais il reste encore un long chemin à parcourir. Cela comprend l'analyse approfondie des risques climatiques pour le secteur et les options d'adaptation, le développement du PNA pour le secteur WASH, ainsi que la mobilisation des ressources pour mettre en œuvre ces plans nationaux. Nous retirons l'engagement du ministère de l'Environnement, de la Pêche et du Développement durable dans tout ce processus.
Finally came to the last case study. We move away from Africa, we go to Asia. The last example is from Nepal. And what I would like to highlight in this last example is that we moved away, or we built from the NDC, and we've achieved one step forward, integrating WASH into the National Adaptation Plan in Nepal. So you'll see this now by Anita Shrestha, WASH specialist in Nepal.
Namaste and greetings to everyone. I'm Arinita Shrestha from UNICEF Nepal, and today I'll be sharing with you some of our initiatives and efforts to make WASH as priority under the climate change agenda of Nepal. Nepal is a host to world-renowned Himalayan range and major rivers that caters to the water needs and ecosystem of South Asia and its national economy through tourism industry. Thus, it is one of the most sensitive and vulnerable countries with regards to climate change. Every year, Nepal faces many kinds of climate-induced small and large-scale disasters, and its impact has been significant with losses of properties, its service infrastructures to impacts on the most vulnerable, like children. The government of Nepal recently conducted vulnerability and risk assessment of country where WASH has been highlighted as one of the key areas which has been affected and will affect many parts of the country. A recent study conducted by UNICEF among 800 children all over the country, where 60% children and youth have reported of reduction in quantity of water, while 46% have reported reduction in quality of water. It has been evident that making WASH service climate resilient to reduce multifaceted impact among population needs to be of utmost priority of the country. In the past, the inaction in WASH sector in relation to climate change has been due to limited space it receives under the climate change agenda in Nepal, as climate change was not treated as one of many sources that would impact WASH service delivery in large scale. The impact on WASH services were also considered inadequately and also only from the public health perspective as one of the public health concerns. Further, inside UNICEF, we were also not clear to what extent and to what actions needs to be taken by UNICEF, which also led to limited engagement with government on the priority for climate change. Though this uncertainty remains, UNICEF took the leap to integrate climate change as one of the agenda under its country program. With this leap, some of the engagement where we made our efforts to work with government, we're engaging with sector players on the dialogues on climate change, initiating learning and exposure visits of sector players and donors on adaptation works done in the country, supported government to initiate national representative study on climate change impact on WASH, and also initiated field level adaptation activities in UNICEF program areas. In 2020-21, UNICEF initiated a formal dialogue with Ministry of Forestry and Environment, and with these dialogues, UNICEF was then invited to second National Adaptation Plan drafting process, where UNICEF was part of 3 thematic areas under health and WASH, DRR, and gender. The challenge that we still had to overcome was that health was still a priority with WASH as contributing area only. We ensured that there is a strong presence of our WASH government counterparts with strong backstopping from UNICEF, and UNICEF was present in all thematic and multi-sectoral dialogues made under the NAP process. Adding to that, a good relationship that we built over time with UNEP NAP team gave us the space to join hands and facilitate the thematic group and a drafting team that brought us to the stage of making WASH a priority area under NAP. With these efforts, among 64 National Adaptation Plan projects, there is now 6 projects under health and WASH worth of $4.7 billion. Between October and December 2021, we made additional dialogue with NAP team in order to consider WASH as part of the national priority project. And the project worth of $1 billion is among the top 3 national priority projects proposed and agreed by the National Coordination Committee for Climate Change. With this achievement, our next step is to support the government on implementation of the priority projects and working with other sectors to bring for WASH SDG and climate agenda achievements, support sectors to make case and rational for climate finance for WASH, and support federal, provincial, and local government to implement the WASH projects through WASH plan development process, capacity building, innovation, and scale up. Support government in development of monitoring mechanism for climate resilient WASH services, and support government to report on the progress of National Adaptation Plan, especially in the context of WASH. Thank you for this opportunity.
Great. So what I think it would be nice to highlight here is how in this started 2020, 2021, and now Nepal has been able to secure a top 3 priority of one of this $1 billion US dollars WASH project into the 3 national priorities to the Nepalese National Coordination Committee as the next step to support the country. So you know that she was describing how little by little they were creating this partnership, these passerelles of trust between the government and the UNICEF and partner staff, and how things are moving forward, integrating the projects in the priorities on the map. So having said so, we come back to Stockholm, and the plane lands back here, and I will invite the panelists to join me in the stage, and we'll go to the third part of this session. And let me introduce the panels. We have Leonard Tet, who's team leader, water and health at FCDO. At FCDO, water and health is the team that deals with water and sanitation. We have also Alastair Morrison, who is the water sector lead at the Green Climate Fund from 2017 till 2019, receiving and reviewing climate proposals in the water sector. Before that, he worked for the UNDP, World Bank, IFC, and SIGWI as a water sector specialist, and for the aid agencies Oxfam and Concern on Humanitarian Interventions in Africa and Asia. He is currently a consultant for UNICEF integrating climate resilience into their WASH programs. And we also welcome Alban Novelon. Alban is a WASH specialist for UNICEF Regional Office in Latin America and the Caribbean since 2015, providing technical and strategic assistance to UNICEF country offices. He worked previously for water utilities in the UK on data analysis for international NGOs in humanitarian responses and for the WASH Regulatory Agency in Haiti. Welcome to you all. And let's start by one question that I will tell all of you. I would like you to answer in approximately 1 minute each. And the first question is, has the WASH sector been too slow to integrate with the climate sector? If so, has the WASH sector missed out opportunities that were on offer a few years ago?
So some quick reflections on that. I live in Glasgow. I was at COP. It was at COP26. It was a huge thing. The sector was making some inroads with a pavilion, a lot of work from SIWI, but still there's a huge amount still to do. I think there was a mention in total size of finance. In any case, all the finance generally isn't sufficient, and the WASH wider water share is insufficient within that. So there's a very short answer, which is that yes, not enough has been done. There's something else as well, which is that energy, I think from climate, there's reluctance to get too involved in too much detail in sectors, which has been challenging for all sectors, but some other sectors have managed to retain a centrality of their contribution to macro climate agendas. So energy and mitigation and reducing emissions, the association between energy and carbon is very clearly understood. I think in a way that water and sanitation and hygiene isn't so hardwired into people's understanding of the impacts of climate change. So yes, there's a lot more to do.
Yes, I completely agree that we haven't really reached out and we haven't gained perhaps a fair share of the funding that is available. We haven't really explained why water is so important to climate. I remember a former head of the Green Climate Fund even saying he didn't really think the water sector deserved to be in the climate space. He did say it was integral to everything, but it could be handled by the energy people or the forestry people or the agricultural people. So there's a lot more I think we need to do to actually reach out to people, unlike most of us, so I imagine a water sector specialist, but we need to be talking to the environment sector people, the energy people, the finance people, and at the most senior levels of government to get water up there on the agenda and to get its fair share of finance.
Thank you. And maybe regarding the question, I think what is very clear as well is that the WASH sector is also already by essence a complex sector to coordinate. You know, we are just so many actors, at least a dozen of them for a minimum, if we want to make a decent coordination within the sector. So adding climate, risk resilience, and all the other actors is obviously another challenge for the own WASH sector. No, I think in terms of missed opportunities, I think right now we are still missing probably we are focusing a lot on basic safely managed services, and we are missing the S of the SDGs, no, because that these services need to be sustained, and to be sustained you need to be risk resilient and you need to be climate resilient. So I think this 6.1, 6.2 indicators probably are very siloed with the rest of the indicators within the SDG 6. No, and I think we probably miss like a more challenging indicator, like enforcing indicator. And I really like now there is this new, I mean, you start to hear about this indicator saying that, I mean, performance indicator saying that probably like the last tranche of payments by, you know, like actors, implementing actors would be paid in 10 or 15 years. And that's a very interesting one, because within one single performance indicator, you just need to rethink the whole way you do your WASH programming and the way you collaborate with others. So yes, I think we probably need some more at SDG level, some more like or at donor level also, some very more constraining and integrating indicators.
Thank you, Alvan. I'm going to do one question each, but I'm not sure if do you hear well there, and or is it a bit too slow? We can speak a bit up, isn't it? Great. So I'm gonna direct my next question to Leonard, and I would appreciate to answer in maximum 3 minutes, so we have time for the audience to ask more questions. What do you think FCDO want the WASH sector to do that has not been really done so far?
Well, first, at the start of this session, you heard from how UNICEF have really tried to hardwire this into their discussions with government and their sector planning. So it's while we have ideas about where more it can go, it's really important to see how far it's come. These are really, really important discussions. There was one point from one of the films around I think from Chad, how these are shared with stakeholders broadly across partners. So because UNICEF or government would organise challenge or discussion fora against the national adaptation plans, civil society engagement from other ministries is really key into those processes. But a few reflections on what more. I think that sort of further, deeper and better understanding of the risks and the risk profiles. Climate has so many multiple, complex, non-linear effects and in short timeframes. So earlier planning norms, I think, are often not relevant. So it's really key to really have a deep understanding of some of the risks. There's quite a lot of discussion on climate finance that goes down the GCF, the Green Climate Fund routes, but actually climate finance is on many different levels. Lots of local authorities, much of private finance is rethinking how it can be. So a broader view on climate finance. And there's a very important research agenda, better understanding groundwater effects, other research elements which are important. And then maybe one on humanitarian as well. I think that was touched on, that I think a comment in the Nepal presentation, that the number of diseases after emergencies. So humanitarian advisors are familiar with second wave effects, that if it's an earthquake or a flood, it's the second wave that really is a cause for concern. And that's often very climate and very WASH mediated. So engaging with humanitarian colleagues on some of those. So just a few remarks, but there's a lot to do. Thanks.
For Esther, you are, with your experience as a GCF water specialist, I think we have, you could give the audience like 3 pieces of advice on what they want, how to present a project, a proposal that you think could tap into those leverage, into those resources.
Okay, I think the first thing I mentioned is, you know, the climate rationale and linking your water project to climate change one way or another. Many funds, many donors have very specific mandates, and they have to deliver climate adaptation benefits to climate vulnerable people, or climate mitigation being quite specific, the reduction, because of your project, what is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? And those are very specific. It's great for you to say you're making progress against SDG 6. It's great to say you're working for Indigenous people, you're achieving gender equality, you're creating jobs. Those are all good things, and good climate projects could and should do all of that. But if you're going to count your water project as a climate project, and it's going to get past the board of GCF, for example, on which FCDO sits, you need to demonstrate that you are helping people adapt to the extremes caused by climate change, or you're reducing CO2 emissions, or both. And I think we haven't done that. We've sort of said our water project's increasing coverage, it's helping SDG 6 target achievement. That's great, but we also need to show how it's helping people adapt to climate change. We take water for granted. As I said, many people in the climate change community, the climate community, are not water people. They have a background in finance, in forestry, in energy. Forestry and energy in particular have captured, rightly or wrongly, I mean, and there's some great projects in those sectors, but they've captured a very considerable amount of the climate finance because they've been active in-country processes right from the beginning, advocating for investment into their sector in a way that I don't think the water sector has. We frequently don't get involved in the country processes at an early enough stage. So the National Designated Authority, which is the focal point in the country for climate action, frequently they convene workshops, as you know, attended many of these personally in various countries, where they bring together the climate community, and the community discusses, you know, what are the priority areas for that country to invest in as climate action. And it's disappointing sometimes to see how few people from the WASH sector attend these workshops. I took a question once, why doesn't GCF do more sanitation projects? But I mean, I turned it around to the speaker asking, well, you're keen on sanitation. GCF would welcome sanitation projects, but GCF has to respond to what's set out in the nationally determined contribution from the country. So did you go to the country workshop and argue for sanitation to be included? And the questionnaire said no. Well, if you don't ask for it, if you don't attend and argue for WASH to be prioritized, it's not going to get prioritized. And then all donors are going to sort of say, well, if the country isn't saying that this is a priority, this isn't a priority for funding. And I think my final reflection quickly would be that, you know, all WASH projects now, that, you know, there is increasing requests from governments in developing countries and from donors that all climate resilience is integrated into all WASH projects. I remember 20 years ago working on a humanitarian intervention after major floods, and it was like the humanitarian department came in, fixed the floods so the development people could then get on with normal development work. And I was sort of seeing non-resilient WASH interventions, and I'm saying, why are we doing those? Because next rainy season, and they said, well, that's okay, then the humanitarian department will come back and fix it next rainy season. Well, that's not resilience. I'm glad to say I don't think that happens so much now, but we have to integrate the resilience so the humanitarian people don't have to keep coming back again and again. We actually have development work that withstands floods, fires, droughts, and other climate impacts. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Very clear pieces of advice. So I think very, very important, very interesting. And Alvan, from your perspective of the work you do as UNICEF regional office with countries, in your case in Latin America, and your interaction with the practitioners and partners in the region, what do you think are, in the first case for the staff of development agencies as UNICEF, the lack of capacity or the capacity gaps they have that we have to really try to strengthen in terms of the staff? And on the other hand, in terms of partnerships, what partnerships do you think we are missing in this debate?
I think in terms of capacity, I think the central one would probably be the coordination and the leadership. And I think we've heard, like during those days, you know, a lot of not only coordination within the sector, but coordination with other sectors as just the basis with private sector, with the CSOs, with everyone, just to make sure that everybody embraces, you know, what we want to see change. No, so I think this would be probably the bottom line of the competencies I would like to see strengthened in at country level, or really this ability to convene everyone, because most of the skills are there in the country, they just don't speak to each other. No? And also, I mean, so then coordination within the sector, but then coordination with externals, Minister of Environment, Minister of Finance, who are very very shy to go and discuss with them. Also like the national risk, disaster risk reduction, I mean, not just climate, are also partners that are very important. And again, the Minister of Environment, because this is where basically the climate plans are being drafted and approved. So obviously, if we, as you say, if we are not there, it's going to be complicated, no? But also, I mean, I would also like to invite probably the climate people also to reach out to the other sectors. No, I think I think it has to be like a two-way round, no, conversation and integration. But definitely the WASH sector is already used to work with education, with health, and I think, I mean, we just need to to expand our reach of collaborators. And if we've got this robust coordination, this very inclusive, regular coordination, and if we had to that, there's some like a powerful and somehow constraining but very visionary indicators like the one I mentioned about you, like with final payments in 15 years, if you manage to sustain your services, I think definitely we've got the right elements to really go beyond any constraint about, you know, like the capacities. And then the people will look for this coordination mechanism, will look for the competencies, the experts in the sectors to be stronger. And also probably like another area of is to make sure that what we do as WASH projects or water project in general really manage to bring livelihoods. I think, I mean, the most constraining issue, if we want sustainability, people need resources. So it cannot just be WASH for WASH. You know, it has to be WASH with agriculture, WASH with climate, WASH for whatever livelihoods that we bring. And I think we tend to bring just a service and tend to miss the opportunity of creating jobs out of all what these services can bring, and especially if we connect with other sectors. So yes, yeah, coordination and within and outside the sector.
Great. And the partnerships?
So yes, so I mean, this partnership will be probably this, no, like just open ourselves to Ministry of Environment, work with actors that work on agriculture, in infrastructures, in transport, in energy, because these are I mean, we could demultiply the job opportunities that we could create from out of a WASH project. And we can, I mean, and this is probably like a very good start to sustain the results that we would like to all see, you know, that people are able to pay for their services. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have a final reflection from you, but before I would like to see if there are questions in the audience. Give the opportunity to ask some questions if there are. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
All the way back here. Hi, thank you very much. Alistair, I really liked your last point that you were mentioning on you know, the need to you know, work between humanitarian and development. But I think, you know, sorry, my name is Kanika Takar. I work for the Swedish Red Cross as a green response and environmental advisor. So I'm working very much on the humanitarian side, but coming from the development side before this. And what I see, I mean, you know, we all are following the money, right? I mean, we'd love to go out and have good intentions, but we do what the money tells us to do. So I wonder if you or any of the panelists have some guidance in terms of how we can better talk to or maybe educate our funders on how to make these connections happen. You know, what kind of language or how can we be better advocating for that connection between humanitarian and development to start happening?
I think there's a lot of talking and a lot of opening of minds and getting people to have experience in both sectors, or people who have come back. If you've responded to an emergency one rainy season, and then you find yourself responding to it in the next rainy season and the next rainy season, that hopefully the message comes through. There's got to be a better way of doing it. Looking at DRR, for example, looking at getting the resilience into the system so you don't keep redoing emergency responses that happened before. Some donors GCF, for example, doesn't do humanitarian responses. It will help resilience. Other donors, FCDO, for example, I know have both humanitarian and emergency. So different donors are in different places and they have different rules. But even within aid agencies, there was quite a big division between the humanitarian team and the development team, which I thought, when I first came to it, I thought that was unfortunate. And the development team were in their country and they spoke the language and they knew the people and they would tolerate the emergency team because there was an emergency. And the thinking, you know, you had to get them to talk, get them to talk better across teams.
Thank you.
You have a mic.
I think it's an excellent question. I mentioned environmental and social safeguards. So I think some UN agencies have this very, very far advanced. The World Bank have this very, very far advanced. We're just finalizing ours. There's 8 standards in the UN model approach for environmental and social safeguards. One is climate change, one is community health, and one is on effective use of resources. So this is now going to make sure, and this will be, and UNICEF has already started liaising with all of our donors on these are non-negotiable. These will be built into all of our programs and the cost for these will be built into all of our programs. But it really raises the flag as in our programs have to incorporate climate resilience. They have to make sure that we're not causing harm in terms of water resources, because at the start of an emergency, there's a huge drive to get water from wherever, but it's looking at the impact of that. Certainly in some parts of an emergency, there isn't a choice that you have to do something, but then you will be given time to correct that, to look at. So rather than water trucking, are there boreholes? How do you reduce the impact of all the water from one borehole? Can you look at alternative sources? So it's definitely changing. I've definitely noticed a change in the last 2 years. So we're doing a lot of advocacy, but also, for example, DG ECHO, from next year, they're basically rolling out their environmental guidelines, not social guidelines yet, but that is with a very strong focus on how do you reduce the carbon impact? How do you reduce the waste? What can you do? They're actually for wash and shelter. I think they're the only 2 sectors where it's compulsory that you do an assessment, a risk assessment. So I think it's changing, but I think it's all of us talking to whoever is working in the sector that this is non-negotiable. It's not an optional add-on if you have funding. It really, because it has to be sustainable. So it's just all coming together. But I'm very optimistic. Thanks. But that answers your question.
Thank you. So I'm the Deputy Chief of Party for the USAID WashFin project. So I'm not with USAID, I work on a project. So we primarily look at urban wash, and we were looking to mobilize additional sources of finance. And we started trying to help USAID think through, you know, where can climate fit? And so we said, well, let's look at some NAPs in some of the priority countries, primarily urban water and sanitation, water supply and sanitation. We don't see it, right? So we came to the same conclusion that they must not be at the table. Then you look at who the designated authorities are, and they're not aligned with urban wash. So recently, I became aware of sectoral NAPs, which I had never heard of before. It was kind of random. In Kenya, they're working on a sectoral NAP. So I'm wondering in terms of pathways. So if WASH is not in the NAP or the NDC, is a sectoral NAP sort of a pathway that could help leapfrog or get ahead if they already have an existing NAP where it's not there, or if it's not there, would that preclude doing a sectoral NAP because it's not part of the priorities? And then the other one that I wanted to ask about, so it's twofold, is I believe these NAPs, there's a process to update them or revise them. So is that another opportunity where you could get it elevated and into the NAP? So I'm really trying to understand, you know, how do you get in from a practical perspective through the process if it's already established and WASH isn't in there?
Who wants to answer? Alistair? Yeah.
Everybody agrees.
Consensus.
I mean, this is a reflection of certain donors. They want to respond to demand rather than dictate what to do. So they look at the documents the countries are producing themselves. And a national document carries more weight, obviously, than a sector document or a regional document. I mean, that's the nature of it. That can also cause problems regionally because you have different neighboring countries in the same catchment all having different priorities when you actually do need an international response. But certain organizations are set up very much focused to responding to what developing countries put in their NDCs and their NAPs. And yes, it's unfortunate if WASH isn't there, you will struggle to get that particular donor to fund a project which the country has not said is a priority. Yes, second version, you have another opportunity, present yourself, argue when NAP 2.0 comes out. And yes, the sector, maybe other donors or the private sector can work with the cities to raise finance for projects which weren't in there, but it depends on the structure and how the donors are deciding which projects to fund.
Yeah. So just to say, I think it's an excellent question. You may remember from Albertine's session that she mentioned that actually UNICEF is supporting the development of a WASH NAP. So as you know, there's funding under readiness under Objective 3 for national adaptation plans. It's 3 million per country per year. Often the lion's share, with the exception of the last $2,000, has been gobbled up for the previous one. But I think it's just really, really important to look at that. So certainly, I know that Zambia has a main NAP, and then it also has embedded in that a water NAP. So I think it definitely is changing. And I think the NAPs are relatively new. Before that, it was the NAPAs. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, but I think it's also what happens if the NAP under the GCF readiness finance window the previous version has gobbled up the funds. So I think there's important options to look at that. But I think they are definitely coming. I'm sure there will be some issues and they will progressively evolve, but certainly the NAP for Chad will be UNICEF's first NAP. So I think it's has a great learning experience, I'm sure, for the whole sector. And we'll be coordinating, of course, with GWP doing the one for that. And also just to say that we put in a proposal last year for Syria for readiness. But anyway, so we were resubmitting it this year. But in the meantime, another agency has put in a proposal for a NAP. And it's very difficult because GCF are very conscious that they don't want duplication and they want complementarity. But the other proposal hasn't yet been accepted. So it's very, very difficult. But just to say that I think there is a lot of opportunity now in those discussions to influence the proposal of what is being, because it's a very long process to get it approved, to influence what is in it, because a lot of them, I think when I last checked, there was only about 27 NAPs, but there's a lot of them still in the pipeline. The time frame is between 3 to 4 years. So even if we've missed the first 2 years, there's still a huge amount of opportunity, and that's where all the data analysis that has been used for in terms of the initial steps can really be helpful. But yeah, really great opportunity, as long as there's a very good relationship and it's a very open process in terms of the who is involved and the different versions that are shared, as long as they have enough time to review. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. There was a question, yes.
Hi, thank you very much. Sorry, I'll stand up. Very interesting presentations. So I have 2 questions for the panelists and Fiona. First question, more to do with the presentations. There was a lot of, we've been discussing about WASH and water all this while. So I was going to ask, within WASH, how explicit sanitation was in national priorities in the 4 case studies that were presented today. And then also to the panelists, within WASH, it's been hard enough to have water included in these climate discussions and with donors. But we also, I think, need sanitation for adaptation and resilience because of implications with, say, health and pollution and all of those things. So any reflections on having a bit, not having sanitation as the poor cousin trailing behind water, and any reflections on how we can sort of also get that up on the agenda. Also just say, I'm Ruhil, I work at the Sanitation Learning Hub at the Institute of Development Studies, so I'm a bit biased.
Who wants to answer the
I can say.
Yes, thank you.
So thanks, Rahel. Those are great questions. And if it's difficult for water, it's really difficult for sanitation. But the links are there, right? I mean, there's one track which is on the mitigation side of things, but and for that, carbon balance, methane inventories are really key and really good science. And if there are errors, if there are gaps, if countries are not fully considering the breadth of their greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, associated with sanitation pathways, then that's one to flag. But more on the adaptation and resilience. So there's another track which relates to climate and health more broadly, for which sanitation is so key and so central. At COP, 60 countries made commitments on climate and health, including moving towards climate resilience health systems, strong health systems, and having universal health coverage. Access to sanitation at home is part of universal health coverage. Also, having wash in healthcare facilities, the strong systems are only strong if they're resilient, and it's somewhat hardwired into that. But the case really needs to be made. So the links are there, but it's there's work to do. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you. Yeah. Alban to share, because we're a bit obsessed about this. We had a chat over a coffee about how the Latin and Caribbean region is actually very, very far advanced. So maybe there's some good examples you can share in terms of the prevalence of sanitation in the NAPs and the NDCs.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, right now, I mean, there is an ongoing study by CIWI and EIDB. And basically out of 25 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region. And so basically out of the 25, like 96% of them were mentioning, I mean, we're having like a water measures regarding water resources, specific measures. 80% of them were mentioning potable water. But then only 52% of them were really having like specific measures for potable water. No? And I'm not too sure, I don't know if you have the data in mind, but regarding sanitation, I'm not too sure if, I think down to 13%.
On this, we have the research.
So I mean, the reality is there, and then I think we need to apply what Alistair was mentioning, you know, to go there and discuss and defend that partner for more water, but also inclusion of sanitation.
Thank you to answer the first part of your question. They should, all those 4 examples should have sanitation. But just for me to highlight, and having worked in the Middle East for a long time, the potential for reuse is just boggles my mind for mitigation, for energy efficiency, but also for water conservation. We have a project in Jordan developed by one of our brilliant national engineers, but basically it's called a 5-in-1, where excess power was sold back to the grid, water was sold to farmers for irrigation purposes, there was water conservation measures, there was with a school, there was rainwater harvesting, and it was all powered by solar, and it was just incredible. And it was just like in a kind of rural community, because while there is a very extensive water network in Jordan, like over like 93%, the sanitation network in a rural area is not very advanced. So I think it's a huge potential, but I think it's something great, but we just need to make sure that, you know, we're doing it the right way. But I think there's lots of potential with nature-based solutions as well. So as long as they're climate resilient, yeah.
Yes, I think we need to have, I can take 2 more questions and ask the panelists to answer in 1 minute. So we give the word then to Alejandro to give the final remarks.
Okay. Thank you. Sharon from SNV, maybe to just build on what Ruhil said and what you said, is you're stating here that it would be fairly easy to reverse the trends to include financing for WASH. But we've seen that financing for rural WASH, specifically rural sanitation, has been going down. So from my perspective, that's almost like more doomed scenarios. There was already not a lot of funding, and now with climate, we we sort of as a watch sector missed the boat. So we're even further behind. How do you see that trend being reversed?
Okay, so as I think I mentioned, our colleagues in the sanitation team are developing a technical brief on climate resilient sanitation. And when they were working on it, there was very much a focus on, well, there isn't very much finance available for climate resilient sanitation. So we need to argue about that and advocate for it. But actually, and then having discussions with Alistair, the issue is about the supply of projects, not the demand for them. There is a huge demand. So I think the issue is that there hasn't been very much technical guidance on what is climate resilient sanitation. And I think that's where we're starting. I think once you have developed the climate rationale for climate resilient sanitation, that's the basis. And upon that, then I think then the opportunities for climate finance will be there. But I think it's basically like, what is climate resilient sanitation? What does it look like? How will it change at different levels with different threats, with different projections? How is it affordable? How can you basically, I think there's also really good examples in Bangladesh about integrating the private sector and creating the demand for climate resilient sanitation. So I think there's lots of plots going on. Also, even with community-led approaches to total sanitation, the CAS and the CLTS programs, even if we're not delivering the services ourselves, you're creating a demand, you're creating the market for it. So I think it's much slower, but I'm optimistic. And maybe when we come back here next year, we'll have some really good examples, of which I sincerely hope so, depending on us all working together. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm building on that question as well, related to financing, because in your steps you mentioned one of the things that we are focusing also defining different financing options. And when you talk of climate resilience WASH, actually we know that the financing has come out strongly, how it's critical. So apart from what the regular ones, conventional source of financings, is there any kind of innovative financing that you can highlight for us? Because the grants and the loans and governments, these are the conventional, having many challenges as well because of many competing priorities. So is there any, from your engagement, is there any innovative financing that you can highlight? I'm asking this because, by the way, I'm Martha Solomon from working at FCDO, British Embassy at this. Currently, we are supporting government of Ethiopia flagship program, particularly targeting the climate resilience WASH pillar of the program together with others. So I just want to hear, because then in addition to that, through our technical assistance, we are also trying to support this innovative financing method. So I want to hear your experience to inform that kind of legs. And the second one is, from what we have heard from the case stories is the good experience in climate resilience or mainstreaming. But there are two parts of the equation when we talk of climate, not only the infrastructure, but there has to be a resilient delivery systems. I just want to hear a bit on that one also, since we are also aiming to support in a kind of system strengthening, post-construction system, which I think is a critical for the sustainable delivery of the service. I just want to hear those experiences. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can answer that in 2 minutes and then have time for Alejandro. That's like a 2-hour conversation. We actually have a whole team of people in UNICEF working on innovative finance. I studied water and rocks. It's definitely not my background. But I think there is a lot of development of the investment cases, basically building the business case for climate resilience sanitation, why it makes sense. I think there's also sustainability bonds, there's green bonds, but I think it's a lot of testing. I think what we're looking at is innovative models where there is some co-financing, there is the private sector, because that's a very strong criteria of many of the climate funds. We also have a team working in our East and Southern Africa regional office who are putting together a climate finance facility. So, I mean, I can put you in touch with them. They've finalized this, so they will have innovative solutions. I'm just off the top of my head, but for sure, I think it's going to change very, very quickly. And the second part of your question was on the enabling environment. No.
Sustainability. That one for the presenters of the case stories. Any experience on the creating resilient delivery systems apart creating from resilient infrastructure?
Well, I think it's also been basically looking at the different scenarios. So how do you ensure your staff can get to the systems? How do you ensure if there is fuel, it's there? How do you ensure that the chemicals are there? if people can't access the facility, who can help come to operate it? That's what I was trying to say at the start. It's not just about the infrastructure itself, it's about how you make sure it works under different scenarios. But also, like from our example in Mozambique, it was like, what happens when all the other water systems break down and yours is the only one that's working? How do you ensure that you're not going to be then leading to over abstraction? But I think it's it'll be an evolving area again in terms of looking at the functionality of the systems under the different threats and the different scenarios. But I will follow up with you with our colleagues in environment in the region.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank for everyone for the very interesting questions. We will continue, but we need to close the session, and for that, I'll give the word to Alejandro Jimenez. Alejandro is the director of the Water and Sanitation Department at TIWI. And yes, we would like to hear what's the takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, a few minutes left. I think I would like to highlight a few points, at least takeaways from my perspective. First is that what the countries have and examples have shown us is that this integration of climate in the water sector and vice versa is a journey. And it's a journey that requires a few things. I will name a few of them. It has been mentioned the stakeholder engagement. So the processes that took different layers of government and other stakeholders, the discussions, the workshops, like making the dialogue happen at the sector level. And this includes, of course, reaching out to other ministries, other stakeholders that you didn't talk with before. And that is the whole point with the climate discussion and the integration that touches upon multiple sectors. Another part of that, it's the integration into national policy. We have seen the examples of the NDCs and then moving to the national adaptation plans and how fundamental that is. And that has been then highlighted by the panelists a few times. So we have to get into that space, because if not, then we can see that to make it a national priority. And that is a very important point. We have to work on our own narrative, the climate rationale, like how our projects are linked to climate and how they are helping either adaptation, mitigation, or both. It's not our usual wash stuff, including climate here and there. And for that, we also need to have more knowledge and evidence. And there are some gaps, some serious gaps. For example, we talk about sanitation in terms of on-site sanitation, like contribution to mitigation. No one is able to put the real numbers there. And that hinders the possibility to really get climate funding. So that is something that funders and donors and the research community also need to help us with. We also have another dimension here, which is advocacy, and it was highlighted by Kanika in her question at different levels. It was the issue of the water pavilion at the COP that last year was the first time. This year will also happen, but it's not only there. It's at the national level. It is with the funders. Now the water security guidelines from GCF has been just released. There will be technical annexes out there. Hope they are up for consultation. Go out there and try to scrutinize what is in there, how WASH is part of it or not, how sanitation is part of it or not, because that will then determine whether the money will flow or not. But all this is what I would like to see in the next years to come, is how all these wonderful efforts that have been done in the last few years by a number of countries get to implementation. That we actually get the money and that we actually make this change in the sector, and we really have these climate resilient services. So that is my hope for the next edition of these sessions in the Water Week. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. Thank you very much for the conveners, the panelists, UNICEF, the team setting this up, Virginia moderating, Ricard Henning, and I wish you a good continuation of the World Water Week. Thank you.